Olá, estamos aqui no Centro de Estudos Internacionais da Fundação Getúlio Vargas, no Rio de Janeiro. Conversamos hoje com a professora Arlene Tickner, da Universidade de Los Andes, sobre narcotráfico e segurança regional. Professor, could you tell us a bit about what's your take on regional security and specifically the problem of drug trafficking in the Andes?
The drugs have been addressed in the Andean context and in Latin America more generally, basically based upon the U.S. war of drugs and its diagnosis and policies to resolve this problem. What this means is that largely military assistance has been provided to different countries. Prohibition and repression have been the norm, and aspects related to education, rehabilitation, etc. have been underestimated, both in the United States and abroad. The results of this policy have been mixed at the best and poor probably at the worst. Illicit coca crops in the Andean region have been reduced very little actually since, for instance, 2000 when Plan Colombia it was initiated in Colombia, and the total tons of cocaine that the region is able to produce have also been reduced quite little after 10 years of a policy that has aimed at reducing this problem significantly. And so what we can say is that essentially the policy has led to a shifting of different aspects of the drug trade between the Andean countries and from the Andean countries to other countries in Latin America. For example, the Mexican drug cartels, which are the main security problem in Mexico today, gained the power that they have today largely as a result of the dismantling of drug cartels in Colombia that exercised a monopoly over the drug trade until the mid-1990s when they were dismantled. To the same degree, countries in Central America, such as Guatemala, have become major transshipment points as a result of the shifting of transit routes resulting from U.S. strategies. So essentially, the problem has remained as significant as it was 10 years ago, with an additional element of concern, and that is that in many countries, drug trafficking organizations have begun to capture the state, both at the local and the central level in several of these countries, including Colombia, where drugs and drug traffickers have a very high degree of influence over the state, mostly at the local level, but also at the national level.
So can we expect a change in U.S. policy anytime soon?
U.S. policy has been the same essentially since the early 1980s when Ronald Reagan declared that drugs were a threat to national security, if not before. During the Nixon administration in the 1970s, drugs were also identified as a lethal threat to the United States. And so basically we have a policy that has remained unchanged for over 30 years. There are signs, however, in the United States that slowly the policy has begun to change, mostly because the U.S. population itself has realized that the policy that the United States espouses has been completely ineffective in the United States in terms of reducing the availability of drugs and reducing consumption in general. The consumption has gone down, but users of drugs continue to do so. In terms of reducing violence related to drugs, among other things. And so what's happening in the United States is that at the state level, many states have begun to depenalize, for example, the usage of marijuana. In mid-2009, excuse me, a poll was taken in which half of the U.S. population expressed its interest in legalizing marijuana, which for the United States is a monumental change. And the federal government, since Obama has taken power, has decided not to overrun decisions being made at the state level, because what happens in the federal system that the United States has is that states make their policies, but when they don't coincide with the federal government policies concerning drugs, the federal government usually overpowers local decisions. And so Obama has decided not to do this. allowing different states to handle these problems in different ways. And what's happening is that not only is our drugs being decriminalized and depenalized, but different cities are using different strategies instead of incarcerating people involved in minor crimes related to drugs. The U.S. today has the largest jail population per capita of any country in the world, and most of this is due to drugs. And so the population is now feeling in its pocket the costs of having such a large population in jail. The current drug czar as well is completely different from other drug czars that different U.S. governments have appointed. He was the police chief of Seattle, and he adopted a lot of alternative types of strategies to confront the drug issue in Seattle. And an interesting thing that he's stated over and over is that stressing the idea that there is a war on drugs is a mistake, because this securitizes and militarizes the strategy that the U.S. should adopt concerning drugs. So I think at the federal level as well, very, very slowly, a climate is being created to at least re-examine the issue and perhaps take steps to changing the policy. And this is essentially what's being promoted today in the House of Representatives. There's a bill being considered that would create a commission of experts to evaluate the successes and rather non-successes of drug policy, and to come up with an alternative solution that the federal government could also adopt to try to combat this problem.
What about Brazil? What role does it play or not play in all of this?
I think Brazil has a significant role to play in combating the drug traffic, but it hasn't adopted this role successfully, probably because I don't think it's interested in doing so yet. And what this means is that basically the U.S. strategy has been the strategy that countries of Latin America have adopted, especially countries like Colombia and others in the Andean region, to combat drugs. And U.S. strategy is basically a bilateral strategy whereby the U.S. negotiates one by one with different countries, constituting a significant obstacle to cooperative action around a problem that by its very nature is transnational, transregional, and requires cooperative efforts, joint efforts to combat it. Brazil participates very intimately in the drug trade and has become one of the main consumers of drugs. And given its status and power in the region, I would say that it should take a more forceful role in trying to develop with other countries affected a more cooperative, consensual scheme for trying to address this problem. And I sense that it's not doing so primarily because of its staunch adherence to the sovereignty principle and to non-intervention, in which it doesn't want other countries, especially the United States, to begin opining on the drug problem as it evolves within the domestic context in Brazil. And this is unfortunate because until Brazil surpasses this concern with non-intervention and sovereignty, I don't really see it taking a proactive role in the region for coming up with an alternative strategy that would join the countries of the region together to address this problem in a more effective fashion. Because what we know today is that the strategy has been a failure. The empirical evidence suggests this, as do different studies done by politicians, like this most recent one signed by Cardoso and ex-President Gaviria of Colombia, among others.
So, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.